if a group of kids were to surround my kid and threaten them, I would consider that as bullying as a parent, right?
One thing for sure is that when a child is hurt, the parents are hurt as well.
Hi everyone and welcome to Canteen Chats. Imagine your child comes home, bursts into tears and tells you, "Mommy, this person pushed me." How would you react? Growing up means learning how to deal with people, kind ones, difficult ones, and everyone in between. At some point, your child might face moments in school that confuse them, upset them, and make them feel small. What should parents do? Joining us today are our three guests who can provide useful perspective on this issue. We have Mr. Justin Mui, Executive Director at Lutheran Community Care Services.
Thank you for having me.
We have Mr. Alsen Chanamuto, a parent and a school engagement manager at the Center for Fathering.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Yes, we also have Miss Winnie Tan, principal of CHIJ St. Nicholas Girls' School, and she has experience working with students across primary, secondary, and JC.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. We are diving into a very complex and difficult to answer conversations today. So, to Alsen, as a parent, how would you respond to the scenario I just described?
I'll be angry. I want to do something.
How dare you bully my
I mean,
child?
that's my initial response. But then when I take a step back, I probably will then start thinking to my I need to be rational about this. I need to take a step back and check my emotions. And what's more important here is to help my child, right? I want to see what's the best I can do for my child, help them through that situation.
So, for Winnie, if a parent were to call you screaming at you and say, "How could you let this thing happen to my child? I mean, is the school doing anything about it?" So, what is your response?
I think first of all, I want to acknowledge that we understand that parents will be concerned. And in fact, I want to share that for many of us teachers, we see the children as our own children. So we are also equally concerned, but I think that concern sometimes can come out in many different ways. And for parents, understandably, I think the first thing sometimes they show concern, it may be they may be anxious, they may want to know what the school is doing, and that's perfectly understandable. So what we then try to do is first thing first is to get more information. I like to use the analogy of an elephant. Elephant is so big. Sometimes they are telling the story from an angle of, just one angle where they feel the side of the elephant, they don't see the trunk. But when you talk to other children, or even the alleged, perpetrator, you talk to them, then you get a full picture. So what we do is we acknowledge parents' concern. We listen to the parents as well, because I think it's important for both the children and the parents to feel heard. And then we try to get a complete picture.
Well, I think one thing for sure is that when a child is hurt, the parents are hurt as well. And sometimes we focus on the child, but the parents also have a lot of thoughts running through their head, right? What is the right thing to say? What is the right question to ask? What should I do? Do I give a hug and say nothing?
Yes.
So how much do I want to be part of this conversation? So I think parents have a lot going on for them. So oftentimes when I see a parent who is struggling and often even very angry, I look at them and I say, hey, actually what's been the hardest thing for you going through this with your child?
Sometimes you don't realize that maybe the parent themselves were bullied when they were younger, right?
Oh, yes.
And so
Yes.
that's how that response comes out too. Because I don't want my child to be bullied the way I was. And so then that could be another reason. Yeah.
Good point.
But the key point, I think, is also that the understanding that everybody has a reaction and comes from the love they have for the children, be it the teachers, be it the parents and all. And I think once you have that common landing point, then it's also easier to continue that conversation on, okay, so what should we all do together next? And let's figure it out together.
Yes. There's action that we need to look into. Something is going to be done, right? I'm not sure whether is it just me, but I just felt that, it seems that bullying is on the rise. Am I right? Or actually not so?
So I can tell you from the school's perspective, I really wouldn't say it's on the rise, but I want to very candidly share that it's becoming more complex. The parents are also more involved in the educating of the children, and therefore sometimes when you get more perspective coming in, then the cases do become more complex, and therefore we probably need a longer time to look at each case and see how best to work with it. I suppose social media as well, and you hear more of such stories versus in the past where we are not as connected.
Okay, how about we first define what is bullying?
So we typically define it as behaviours. It could be verbal, it could be non-verbal, it could be physical in nature. And there tends to be repetitive behaviour with the intention to cause harm. Meaning that, the child does something knowing clearly that, I'm doing this because it's going to hurt somebody. And there's another dynamic to it, which is the power difference. Typically in bullying, then there's a difference in power. The power could be the size of a child. It could be actually a collective power. So a group of students.
I mean, just if a group of kids were to surround my kid and, threaten them, I would consider that as bullying as a parent, right? Or if I see a particular child doing nasty things to my kid every day, that's repetition as well, and that could be bullying to me as a parent.
I think sometimes it's important to distinguish between what is bullying and maybe once off, unintended, or really the child didn't think through hurtful behavior. But why we do that, I think it's important to go back to the reason why we want to define, for instance. It's really because so that we can get to the root of what's causing that behavior, and then therefore think about, okay, how can we address that root? Whereas if it could be just without thinking through, it's a careless kind of behavior or moment of folly kind of behavior, then the way we would address it would be quite different.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's why there's, in a way, you should define, but we also don't want to be caught up in the definition itself, because I think what's more important is then, okay, how do we then move forward?
What do we do about it?
Yes, what do we do about it?
Yeah, because as parent, I sometimes do realize that some careless behavior can be repetitive also. Some people with very strong character, bossy, or they tend to use very sarcastic word, right? But the person who is receiving it may not like it. So do we then consider such cases as bullying?
So if it's really not intentional, but part of, for instance, the character traits, then I would ask the other party to give them a chance to say, please don't call this child a bully, because then that comes with certain connotation. But we will acknowledge that the child needs to correct the behavior. And therefore, I go back again to our focus is on what happens after that. And therefore, if it's a matter of really the language used because they didn't know that it could be hurtful to use this language. Okay, again, it goes back to they didn't know it could be hurtful. Then the follow-up action would be then to help them realize that, hey, this could be hurtful to your friend.
Yeah.
And then we could resolve and mend the relationship from there.
Yeah, so I don't think a child will wake up one morning and then just say, wow, who's someone I'm going to hurt today? I don't think that's natural. But at the same time, if a child really has the intention to hurt someone, which is the definition of bullying, then a lot more help needs to be brought in, because I would be wondering what happened to this child, that the child became so desensitized to the point that he or she decides that, I want to hurt somebody. There must be other things that the child is experiencing, which then you need to get to the bottom of that matter.
From what you all have been sharing, I mean, it's important that we do not label them, when we haven't find out the underlying issues. What can cause harm if we are too fast to label who is the victim and who is the bully?
They are growing, you don't want to have an identity that is stuck to them, that they grow up thinking that that's who they are, because that's not who they are. They are more
Very
than
good
that.
point.
What we do when there is any incident or any case, the important thing for us is to let the students know that they have made a mistake. I think they must not be afraid to admit that they made a mistake, and that's where school, I think, is that safe place for them to learn. And then understand that with their action there are consequences, and that is why we also mete out, I think, disciplinary consequences. And these are not meant so much as a punishment per se, but it's also to help the kids to connect between there's a cause and an effect, and so that the next time they have an impulse to do something similar again, then they will remember that, but this past experience that I had is that if I do this, then this will happen, and it's not a nice feeling, to have, disciplinary consequences meted out on me. And hopefully that will be that one step to help them as they learn to process their own thoughts, their own emotions. Because I sometimes also remind parents that children, depending on their ages, sometimes the very young children, they still operate on the carrot and stick approach. And therefore, we need to tell them that when, you do something wrong, this will be the consequence, and this consequence, more importantly, is to help you learn. And it's not just because, we want to punish you for doing bad things.
We come across situations where I think in one case a primary 5 girl was called a virus, and then it caught on. So the other classmates started also calling her virus, or they would, like, when she goes near to them, they would move away and stuff like that. So I think that has gone on over a period of time, and it was quite hurtful for this person. And I think the other complexity to stories like this is that it actually started out as what they thought was a joke. So when we asked the child, like, what were you thinking the first time you called so-and-so a virus, they actually were not really thinking.
Just having fun, right?
They thought they were having fun. So it started out that way. So the awareness of how something hurts somebody doesn't come as naturally as we think it would.
Right.
And sometimes it requires then a conversation to help them to see, hear, and experience that they have actually hurt somebody else.
Yeah, and sometimes it requires more than one conversation. It could be a series of conversations, because I think children, depending on their ages, they are also at different developmental stages. So sometimes we use our adult lenses to say, I told you this before, the teacher taught you this before, or at home, the parent taught you this before, why do you still do it?
Yeah, so sometimes we have to engage the person who has caused harm to someone, and our main focus is to help them to share what happened. We oftentimes also hear that, the story is that they were hurt by other prior incidences before, and that hurt remain in them. So, we call it hurt people, and it's not that they want to, but it's hurt that is not transformed, sometimes ends up getting transmitted.
Having said that, let's come back to our very first question then. How should parents respond if the kids come home and tell you that they have been bullied? What do you think?
We use this example a lot in our parents' training. So we ask parents, what's the first question you would ask? And oftentimes they will say, why? Why did my child get bullied? Why did that boy do this to you? Or why did you do this to your friend? So we encourage them to have a different conversation instead. You ask what happened, because when you ask what happened, you are interested in the story. You are very curious to find out what was the experience for your child at that moment. And actually learning how to ask the right questions is very key, because that creates that space for children to be willing to ask for help. Because if the adults respond with in a manner that maybe doesn't encourage them to speak more, then sometimes they might learn that, well, maybe better not to say. But if the adults are actually able to create that space for them to share, then children will be more willing to actually ask adults for help.
I was just thinking when you shared the story about the virus, as a parent, I'm thinking, when should I have stepped in that story? Like, when would have been the right time as a parent to have addressed with my child, like, go and speak to your teacher, or go speak to your, as a parent, I'm just wondering, where's the right time to do that?
Yeah, definitely if a teacher hears that, I think from an educator, it's very natural. We will step in. But again, the truth of the matter is, sometimes it doesn't stop even after an adult step in. If we want to let them know that certain behavior are not acceptable, then it's actually okay to step in early, because it gives them the signal that, this is not acceptable. But in terms of stopping the behavior, I would advise that, if a consistent messaging from all around, not just school, parents, sometimes even the community, to, you could be on the bus and you could hear some kids using these words very carelessly. In fact, it would be a great role modeling to the kids if you could come in to say, girl, boy, actually it's not very nice for you to say that. Then the kids get a notion that, oh, okay, it's wrong.
I remember when my daughter came back one day, she used to take the school bus to school, right? So one day she came back home, she was telling me, Daddy, my good friend keeps getting bullied on the bus. This big older girl keeps calling her names and telling her she shouldn't sit on this part of the chair or move to the back of the bus. And so then she was like, what should I do? My friend is too afraid to speak to her teacher. So I said, then if your friend is too afraid, then you should bring your friend to either your own form teacher or her form teacher and say that this is happening and what should she do. And that's what she did. She brought her friend, she went to see her form teacher, and the form teacher stepped in, went to speak to the older girl, and the older girl stopped behaving that way. And so, when we step up and we stand up as an adult to kind of teach them how to do it. I didn't go and confront the bus lady or the teacher or the principal, but I taught my daughter how to do it. So that's one way of doing it.
And that's great. It's about giving the children that opportunity to be the one, and they feel empowered to do something about it, and to let them know that I'm not totally helpless. I can do something about it.
It reminds me of something that happened with my son.
Right.
He came back from school. I usually pick him up from school, right? So when he came into the car, he looked really sad, was upset. So I asked him, what happened? Why are you looking the way that you are? And then he started crying. So I said, okay, I'll give you some time. You cry, you let it out first. And then after that, I told him, so what happened? Tell me what happened. He said, one of the older boys knocked me on the head while I was coming out of school. And so then I said, so what can you do the next time this happens? Because this time around, he didn't know what to do. He just walked out. So I said, what can you do the next time this happens? So he said, maybe I can tell my teacher, or maybe I can tell him not to do it again. So I said, exactly. So next time you know what to do, right? So that's how I guess you kind of take them out of the emotions of it and say, okay, what else can I do?
Yes.
And it's okay that you didn't know what to do this time,
Yes.
but the next time you know what to do. So I don't know if that helps.
And they remember better when they are the ones who come up with the solution themselves.
Yeah.
We know that the online space actually adds an additional layer of complexity, right, to this issue. Let's first watch a clip before we carry on our conversation on cyberbullying.
Don't you think it's a bit weird that he wants you to wear a Snow White costume to a first date?
Why? Snow White is so pretty. And if you ask me, it just shows Brian really likes sweet girls.
What are you guys doing here?
I can't believe you fell for it. What a dummy.
Smell for Brian.
That's alright.
Right. So this is outrightly an online bullying. A group of girls just doing something unpleasant to a girl. So we see a lot of that going on in schools. And for schools to handle cyberbullying is kind of difficult as well, right?
Yeah, because first of all, I think a lot of these, like in this instance, it happened outside of school. But I think the important thing is for school, I think as long as it's our student, we are concerned. But I think it's that part about hearing the child, letting them verbalize their emotions and feelings is important as a first step. So in this case, yes, the girls, even though it's very clearly wrong, letting them still have that avenue to verbalize instead of just saying that what you did was wrong. No second question about it, and I don't want to hear any of your explanation. Because sometimes in our fit of anger, for parents, for instance, that may be how we handle it. And then you expect the behavior to stop. But then the complication then comes, just now we talk about complexity, is then things can go then underground. And the last we want is actually for things to go underground, because when it's still above ground, that's when the community, the adults, the parents, the teachers can come in, the counselor can come in to address it. And for this case, I would like to think that I hope that the school also has a community where there will be people obviously knowing that this is not the right behavior, and you have a community then bending around the victim. And from then on, there is also that chance to help everyone around learn that, this is not the right thing to do. So sometimes a lot of these hurtful behaviors is not just about the people who are directly involved. It's also about the whole community around them, knowing what is right, what is wrong, as well as giving the support.
Yeah, so when things get into the cyberspace, it often spirals way beyond the control of the person who posted it. So for us who are on the receiving end, I always encourage that let it stop at you. Even if you have an urge to share, pause and ask yourself, actually what's happening for that child? What could be happening for the family of the child? And take a more reflective approach rather than to share, and then that ends up fanning the flames beyond control of anyone.
Do schools have any cyber wellness education?
We do. In fact, I think throughout their educational journey, right from when they're in primary school to secondary school to JC, the messaging is reinforced. So we don't take it as once off, we teach you this and then you should know this. And if you are, first of all, I think the first step is always don't do it. So don't be the perpetrator. We teach them to always think twice about posting things, because think about what are some of the unintended impact it may have. And if, let's say, that unfortunately happens, then I think the resolution is also, tell someone about it. Don't suffer in silence. And that bit about just now, the check-in that we did about speaking up.
Yes.
Because when you speak up, that's when you can get support from the people around you, be it the adults around you, be it your friends around you. So I would say the first step is don't try to solve this issue alone to cover up or get them to delete a post yourself.
I think as parents, it's very important that we stay connected with our children, have constant conversations about what they're experiencing in the real world, but as well as online. As much as the schools do cyber wellness workshops and programs, I think what our kids share with us may be beyond that. And that's where we come in as parents and say, hey, did you watch this? Did you learn this? And tell me more. And when we have those conversations, I think we can actually help them through that discovery of the online space a lot better than what the school can do, because our kids may have very specific things that they need help with. As a parent, of course, we're always wanting to protect, right? We come from a place of making sure our kids are well protected. And so if our child is the one who's being, hurt, then we want to know how long is it going to take and how long is too long, right? That's a question that as a parent I would want to have as well. And like you say, if it's going to take years, then what do I do in the meantime as a parent? How do I protect my child?
So to assure parents, what we do is, if there are environmental factors we can control, that is usually the first thing we do, to also make it more challenging for be it the children or the teenagers to engage in repeated behavior of the same kind. So for instance, distancing them, or really removing that physical environmental trigger, for instance, would be concrete steps that would definitely, I think, be taken.
Yeah, so with all that's happening, sometimes we focus on the behaviors, but what really matters is people and relationships, right? They are at the very center of, what's important for us.
But I think sometimes we may also go from the angle of wanting fairness and justice, and that's the part that sometimes complicates, because I think the perception of fairness could also differ across different parties.
Yeah, I think fairness is very tricky. You can have a very fair outcome, meaning if you do A, you will always get B. And that's a fair outcome. But oftentimes we emphasize on a fair process. And a fair process will take time, meaning that you are allowing all parties an opportunity to share about what's been happening. And a quick story I want to bring up is, this is for you mentioned about older children, right? These were students that were going to graduate, and the class advisor called us in to intervene for a situation where 10 classmates were apparently picking on one particular boy. So it was 10 versus 1. And when we brought the parties together, I had to spend a lot of time speaking to all of them one by one to get their stories out, including making sure this one boy is supported by people, because 10 versus 1 is very scary. So he brought in someone that he respected, but also the rest of the 10 friends respected. It became a space for all of them to share, and it turned out that there was also some part where the boy who was being picked on, he unknowingly over a period of time had flaunted his wealth. And some of his friends were from very low income, and the way that he said it and did it over a period of time actually also affected them. Not to say that he deserved what happened to him, but this was actually mentioned by the friend that he brought in. So you talk about relationships, right? The person who cares about you will say what's true and what's helpful from a position of care and love, right? So the friend did just that. The friend wanted him to learn Well, the class advisor actually, after that, they all decided to do something about the relationships, and so he sponsored an outing. Yeah, he said we will all go for this outing.
Wow.
I asked him why, and he said, I don't want my boys to go out into the working world not knowing how to fix relationships.
Yeah, and for us, from an educator's point of view, we send the same message also to say that this is an important life skill, the building, not just building relationships, but maintaining relationships, and then how they go on then to use that relationships to help them become a better person as well.
Why? What's so important about restoring the relationship?
The reason why we want to have that relationship is so that they don't just learn about, oh, this is right, this is wrong, but it's also because I don't do it again because now that person is my friend. And I don't want to, I don't want to do something nasty to my own friend. Or if it would be even better if something else happens to now my friend and I can stand up for my friend. And I help to, teach other people that this is something wrong and that let's not do it. I think that's where we want to build a community, and that is our bigger goal in education. The whole society, we want the whole society to be a kinder society where we always consider the feeling of others. And that can only happen, I think, when you have a relationship with a person.
Yeah, we don't just want to teach our children hate knowledge, right? Some of these very basic social skills.
That's right.
It's very important for them to learn. But we can't help parents being anxious when we prolong this restorative process, right? Parents do get anxious because they want to wait. It's not that they don't want to. But then they see that, no matter how much the schools and the teachers are trying to make sure that they are protected, they're safe, the child is still not feeling any better.
Parents are also part of the restorative process.
Okay,
So I
give
think,
us a little
well, if
insight on how to do it.
on one hand, we are having conversations with the child, but on the other hand, we're also having conversations with the parents, and we're also helping them to give them a chance for their own voice to share about what's happening for them, and that also takes time. I think sometimes maybe because you want to assure parents, so perhaps the language used is, let the school handle it. We will take care of the situation. We will keep you posted. I think unintentionally, sometimes it might put parents outside. But perhaps the language should be one of explaining what's happening, what's the process, what's the current situation, and an invitation to parents to say, and actually at the end of the day, we really want to work with you to help this situation.
And I want to share that we have also had many cases of parents who role model the part about the empathy, in that they know that their child is well supported, and in fact they approach the school to ask the school, what are you doing for the other child, to actually help the other child learn. So even though their child is the one being hurt, they show care and concern for the other child, and I think that's great role modeling for their own children to see that, even though I'm the one being hurt, yes, I acknowledge my own emotions and I care about my own emotions, but I will still have that room and that space to show the care and the concern for someone else who even hurt me. Of course, then it becomes you help everyone to be that bigger person. It's not easy, but if the adults around them show them how they can do it, then I think that plays a big part in building that relationship that we were talking about earlier.
I think coming back to role modeling as well, like how the parent approaches the school, talks to the teachers, talks to the principal, I think that also role models to the kids how they should respond in a situation like this.
Yes.
And that helps them to develop that skill. Like, this is how I should be talking to my friends too, because my daddy is talking that way or my mommy is talking that way. So I think role modeling by parents is essential.
And really just an example, so in say, parents who very politely, even though, they're anxious and all, is still able to keep their calm to say, I would really just want to understand what happened so that I can talk to my child versus, coming from a demanding tone. Do you know what happened? How can the school let this happen? And so on. Then it shows the child also that, okay, this is the mode that I want to put on when something happens to me. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that.
How schools and parents can work together. I mean, we talked about it much earlier, But I think we can dive deeper into this.
Conversation is important. And it is true. Sometimes even after that conversation, we find that things are not working out, and it could be due to different circumstances of the children. That's why each case is different. And therefore, it's times like this that sometimes we engage, external parties to come in, be it to help in mediation. Sometimes we know parents out of good intention, they will say that, hey, it's something a little bit small, I want to just resolve it, between parents, ourselves, and we talk about it. In fact, I think it's good and we are thankful, and we just ask that then whatever it is, inform the school as well. So it's that spirit of sharing information, just like whatever happens in school, we make it a point to share the information with parents. We hope that parents do the same, that whatever you do, whether it's at the back end to try and resolve some of these incidents, please share with the school, so that then it's all about working together.
As parents, sometimes we want to solve the problem straight away, right? We want to step in and we want to get to the root of it. But what we lose when we do that is sometimes we don't let our children try and work out the situation. So if they themselves try and work it out with their friends, talking with their peers about the issue, they're actually learning social skills, right?
Yes.
And then that's a better way for them to learn than for us as parents to step in and try and solve the problem for them.
Do we then ask parents to just sit back at home and just trust the schools to handle all these conflicts and resolve it?
I would say that I think, again, we also come from the angle of empathy. We recognize that, when we talk about taking time, sometimes from the parents' angle, they feel that nothing is happening. And therefore, as parents, they want they feel the responsibility to want to do something for their child. And in some instances, as we had seen in the more public cases, that they maybe take it out on social media because they feel that they need a voice. So while we can perfectly understandable, why parents do that, I also just want to take the chance to also share that when such things, I think, go into the realm of public space and public opinion, it does then take the attention away from schools to focus on the children as well as working together with the parents, because then a part of that time will need to be dedicated to managing the public responses, which many a times, I think I would like to say quite honestly, actually may not be so helpful, because they do not understand, just now we talk about complexity, the complexity of that situation. So I come back to also, again, the school's priority is also about helping the children learn that school is a safe space to learn. But when you have public judgment, then they feel that they don't have a second chance at all. Not just, the children, but sometimes the parents also. And then that defensive behavior, could then come out. Then it doesn't help all parties.
So we're not doing things for the children. How long and how far can you do things for the children?
Yes.
And what do they learn if you're
Yeah.
always
Correct.
doing things for them or solving problems for them? But neither do you want to be in that position where you're doing things to the school. Where perhaps, there's expectations of a certain way that the school should respond. So I think likewise, at the end of the day, I feel that it's all parties coming to work with one another, and that's that fundamental principle.
Yeah, and I would go even further to say that it's not just the school, the parents, but the whole community. Then there is that kind of common understanding as a society. And that is really the much bigger goal that we want to work towards as well, to create a kinder, more compassionate society as a whole in Singapore. So it's not just about in school, at home, but the whole community and society. Yeah.
So maybe as a parent, if I push back in the sense that, you say school should be a safe space. So the parent is thinking, my child doesn't feel like the school is a safe space.
Yes.
And it's been, a week? My child is still waiting. So what, how long more should they wait?
Right.
Yeah.
What else can they do?
Yeah, and therefore, again, it goes back to the point of communication. I think to keep that communication channel open so that we update one another to say that this is what we are trying to do, and sometimes even be ready to share that, this might not be working, we want to try something else, and to keep the parent informed.
So as a parent also, if you are struggling with engaging the school, you can be very real and authentic and tell the school how you feel,
Yes.
how you
Yeah.
are struggling, how it's so hard for you, what is it like at home with your child. Because sometimes also the school might not have this information. And actually it's both ways also. I think school need to be real and authentic. I think it's also one thing to assure parents, because we're professionals, right? You want to assure them that everything's in control. But sometimes if it's not really in control, to also be upfront to say that actually this is really tough. Share a bit about the tough situation or what's uncertain about it, and be real about it, because parents can sense the sincerity of the teacher that's talking with them.
Yeah, and on the point that you said, some parents want to put their case out in the public. Actually, they didn't know that they're exposing themselves, the child, to even more dangers, right?
I mean, there was a real situation that happened that way, where it was a video clip that went online, and suddenly the very helpful, enthusiastic netizens started identifying people, started to tag people, started to say who these individuals were. And I had a mother who actually shared that she was the mother of the boy who had hurt somebody, and she said that it was so tough for her because even when she went downstairs to the market, she had people coming up to her and say, "Hey, that one your son," and it's hurtful for her. So there are other implications when things go out into that space.
So many things to learn. Okay, let's then try to summarize and then share your final advice and takeaways. Justin?
I think we should remember that we need to respect the dignity of all parties. And dignity is a very big word, but it comes down to 3 basic ingredients: voice, agency, which is your choice that you can do something to make things right, and community, sense of belonging. So if we have all these 3 in place, then I think we can really have a good headway at building trust in a school community.
I think we talked about role modeling as parents. How do we help our kids through difficult times? We want to role model the right behaviors for them. We want to role model how do they handle difficult situations. And when they see those things from us, then they will apply it in their lives too. And if we see it as a lifelong thing, then it becomes easier to talk with them. And then how do we do that in an easy way, I guess, is to always stay connected with our kids. We want to make sure that we're always having constant conversations, like Winnie mentioned as well. Like having those constant conversations, those on the bus ride, on the MRT, wherever you are over a meal, having those conversations really gives you a doorway into their world.
Right. Winnie?
And we are with you. I want to say that the school is really with the parents in that even though the children are with us for a limited period of time, be it primary school 6 years, secondary school 4 years, but what we want to do is to teach them, to let them have the skills that they carry with them for the rest of their lives.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, therefore, the focus, sometimes we are thinking about the long-term impact. And even if things don't work out the way we may want to in the short term, but if we know that this is something that they will carry with them away in the long term, sometimes be it not so pleasant things, we will not hesitate to do it because we know that this is important to them and they may appreciate it only later on in life. But that's our job as adults, to do sometimes the difficult things that the children cannot do themselves, so that eventually when they are in that stage of life where they can do it themselves, then they can pass it on and pay it forward to their own children.
Thank you, our panelists, for your honest and generous sharing. These moments aren't easy for children of our parents, but when families and schools walk through them together, children learn that conflicts can be productive and relationships can be repaired. Our children learn how to handle tough moments by watching the adults around them. And when we respond with care and calm, we show them what healthy communities can look like. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe and share. Follow us for more conversations about education, parenting, and more. Thanks for watching Canteen Chats. See you next time. Bye.